Hey guys, welcome to Karenology. You won't believe how far some people will go to cause trouble.
Michael Sanders had always dreamed of living in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood after retiring from his military service. The suburban cul-de-sac he chose promised tranquility, a place where he could finally lay down roots and enjoy the fruits of his hard-earned savings. The house wasn't perfect, but it was his. He spent months repairing and improving it, savoring every moment of the process. But the promise of peace was shattered the moment he crossed paths with the Homeowner Association. It started innocuously enough. A letter in the mail informed him of a fine for having his trash cans out a day early. Michael, perplexed but not wanting trouble, paid the fine. Then came another notice. His grass was too tall. A week later, he was cited for parking his truck in the driveway overnight. Each new infraction seemed more absurd than the last, but the fines piled up, and Michael began to sense a pattern. Karen Hudson, the Homeowner Association president, had made him her target. Karen was the epitome of a tyrant disguised as a community leader. She wielded her authority with ruthless precision, using the association's vague rules to harass and control. For reasons Michael couldn't fathom, she seemed determined to make his life a living hell. Perhaps it was his independent spirit, his refusal to attend the neighborhood's endless meetings, or simply that he didn't grovel before her. Whatever the reason, Karen had decided Michael Sanders was her enemy. The situation escalated when Michael returned home one evening to find a group of strangers on his property. They were workers sent by the Homeowner Association, and they were tearing out a section of his fence. Karen stood nearby, clipboard in hand, issuing orders like a general on a battlefield. Michael approached, his voice calm but firm. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Karen barely glanced at him. "Your fence is in violation of the community guidelines. It's obstructing the view." "The view of what?" Michael snapped. "It's my backyard." "The guidelines are clear," Karen replied, her tone icy. "You should have received notice." Michael hadn't received any notice, but arguing with Karen was like shouting into the wind. He ordered the workers to stop, but Karen smugly informed him that the Homeowner Association had the authority to correct violations without his consent. Furious, Michael contacted the local police, only to be told it was a civil matter. The fence incident was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Michael's mailbox became a repository for threats disguised as warnings. The fines increased, each accompanied by vague accusations of noncompliance. He tried to reason with Karen, but her responses were dripping with condescension. "If you can't follow the rules, perhaps this neighborhood isn't a good fit for you," she said during one particularly heated exchange. Then one night, everything changed. Michael was asleep when he was awakened by a loud banging on his front door. Disoriented, he grabbed his phone and went to investigate. Through the peephole, he saw several men in dark uniforms. Their badges were unfamiliar, and their demeanor was anything but professional. "Open up, this is an official Homeowner Association inspection," one of them barked. Michael opened the door cautiously. "What's going on?" The man in charge stepped forward. "We've received reports of illegal firearms in this residence. We need to conduct a search." Michael's blood ran cold. "Illegal? I have permits for everything, and you're not law enforcement. You have no right to enter my home." Karen's voice cut through the tension. She appeared from behind the group, her arms crossed and a smug grin on her face. "We have every right. The community voted to grant the Homeowner Association emergency enforcement powers." Michael stared at her, incredulous. "You can't be serious." Karen's smile widened. "You should read the bylaws more carefully." Before Michael could respond, the men pushed past him, storming into his home. He followed, protesting every step of the way. They rifled through his belongings, confiscating his legally owned firearms and other items. One of them even snapped photos of his personal documents. Michael felt a mix of rage and helplessness. When the men finally left, they handed him a notice of confiscation. Karen lingered in the doorway, savoring the moment. "You brought this on yourself," she said. "Perhaps now you'll learn to respect the rules." Michael spent the rest of the night documenting everything. He filed police reports, contacted an attorney, and even reached out to local media. But the Homeowner Association's influence ran deep. Karen had friends in high places, and Michael quickly realized he was up against more than just a neighborhood bully. Days later, as Michael reviewed his mounting legal fees, he discovered something chilling. Buried in the Homeowner Association's records, which he obtained through a court order, was a series of emails. They detailed a plan to redevelop his property into a parking lot for a new commercial complex. The Homeowner Association had partnered with a local construction company, and Karen stood to profit handsomely from the deal. The discovery reignited Michael's determination. He might be outnumbered, but he wasn't outmatched. With the support of a few sympathetic neighbors and a tenacious investigative journalist, he began to expose the corruption at the heart of the Homeowner Association. But as Michael soon learned, Karen and her allies were willing to go to any lengths to silence him. Michael Sanders knew he had crossed a line with the Homeowner Association, but he didn't care. Karen Hudson's illegal actions and her smug sense of invincibility only fueled his resolve. Armed with evidence of corruption, Michael set out to rally the neighborhood against her reign of terror. What he didn't expect was how deep the conspiracy went, and how far Karen was willing to go to silence him. The morning after the raid, Michael convened a small group of neighbors in his garage. Among them were Lisa, a single mother who had been fined repeatedly for minor violations, and Tom, an elderly veteran who'd been harassed over the color of his mailbox. As Michael laid out the emails he'd uncovered, shock and anger rippled through the group. "They're trying to turn our homes into a parking lot for that new shopping center," Michael explained. "Karen's in bed with the developers, and they're using the Homeowner Association to force us out." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I can't afford to move. This is my son's home." "None of us should have to move," Michael said firmly. "We're going to fight this, but we need to stick together." The group agreed to take action. They began distributing flyers detailing Karen's corruption, hoping to sway more neighbors to their side. Lisa volunteered to start a petition, while Tom reached out to his contacts at the local Veterans Association for support. Michael focused on the legal battle, working closely with his attorney to build a case against the Homeowner Association. But Karen wasn't about to let them win without a fight. One evening, as Michael returned home from a meeting with his lawyer, he found his driveway blocked by an unfamiliar car. A man in a dark suit stood leaning against the vehicle, his expression unreadable. Michael approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man handed him an envelope. "You've been served," he said curtly before driving off. Inside the envelope was a lawsuit filed by the Homeowner Association, accusing Michael of defamation and seeking an astronomical sum in damages. The message was clear. Karen was trying to bankrupt him into submission. Michael's attorney, Sarah Jenkins, was unshaken. "This is a classic intimidation tactic," she said. "Don't let it scare you. We'll file a countersuit and request a public hearing. The more eyes on this case, the better." Michael nodded, but the stress was taking its toll. His nights were sleepless, filled with thoughts of losing his home and the life he'd worked so hard to build. But every time he considered giving up, he thought of Lisa, Tom, and the other neighbors who were counting on him. The next escalation came in the form of sabotage. One morning, Michael woke up to find his truck's tires slashed and graffiti sprayed across his garage door. "Get out!" He called the police, but the officer who arrived seemed uninterested. "Probably just some kid," the officer said with a shrug. "Not much we can do without witnesses." Michael suspected otherwise. The handwriting in the graffiti matched Karen's distinctive scrawl, a detail he photographed and added to his growing file of evidence. Still, the incident unnerved him. If Karen was willing to resort to vandalism, what would she do next? The answer came sooner than expected. During a community meeting that Michael attended to confront Karen publicly, she unveiled a new Homeowner Association rule. Anyone with unpaid fines or ongoing legal disputes with the association would have their voting rights suspended. The rule was clearly aimed at silencing Michael and his supporters. Michael stood up, his voice steady but filled with anger. "This is nothing more than an attempt to suppress dissent," he said. "You're stripping us of our rights because we're standing up to your corruption." Karen's smile was ice cold. "The community voted on this measure," she said smoothly. "Democracy in action. You mean the people you've bullied and intimidated into submission?" Michael shot back. "This isn't democracy. It's a dictatorship." The room erupted into chaos. Some neighbors cheered Michael on, while others, clearly under Karen's thumb, shouted him down. Karen banged a gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. The meeting ended in disarray, with no resolution. As the weeks passed, Michael's fight gained traction. The petition Lisa started gathered hundreds of signatures, and Tom's outreach brought media attention to their plight. A local journalist, Emily Carter, began investigating Karen and the Homeowner Association, uncovering a trail of questionable financial dealings and backdoor agreements. But the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. Michael's home was targeted again, this time with a brick thrown through his window. Attached to it was a note: "Drop the case or else." Michael knew he was walking a fine line, but he refused to back down. With Emily's help, he organized a press conference, laying out the evidence of corruption and calling for Karen's resignation. The event drew a sizable crowd, including several media outlets. Karen's smug confidence began to crack as reporters bombarded her with questions. That night, Michael received a call from an anonymous number. The voice on the other end was low and threatening. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sanders. If you know what's good for you, you'll stop." Michael's response was simple: "I'm not afraid of you." But as he hung up, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. Michael Sanders knew he couldn't afford to underestimate his opponents. The threats, vandalism, and legal maneuvers orchestrated by Karen Hudson and the Homeowner Association weren't just personal. They were part of a calculated strategy to break him. But if they thought he would fold under pressure, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Michael had spent years in the military, navigating life-or-death situations with precision and determination. This battle, though less overtly dangerous, required the same level of strategic thinking. His first step was to secure his home. He installed additional cameras, reinforced his doors and windows, and even reached out to a local security expert, a fellow veteran who was more than willing to help. "These people aren't just bullies," Michael told him as they reviewed the new security setup. "They're criminals." The next morning, Michael received an unexpected visitor: Emily Carter, the journalist who had been investigating Karen and the Homeowner Association. She arrived with a stack of documents and a look of urgency. "You need to see this," she said, spreading the papers across Michael's kitchen table. "It's worse than we thought." Emily had uncovered a network of bribes and kickbacks linking Karen, the Homeowner Association board, and the construction company aiming to redevelop the neighborhood. Emails revealed how Karen had pressured vulnerable homeowners into selling their properties at a fraction of their value. In return, she and her associates received hefty payouts disguised as consulting fees. "This is the smoking gun," Emily said. "If we can get this in front of the right people, Karen's done for." But Michael knew exposing the corruption wouldn't be easy. Karen still had considerable influence, and she wasn't above using fear and intimidation to maintain control. As if to prove the point, Michael's phone buzzed with a new text message. It was from an unknown number. "Back off or you'll regret it." Michael showed the message to Emily, who frowned. "They're scared," she said. "That means we're getting close." Later that day, Michael and his growing network of allies organized a town hall meeting. They invited every homeowner in the community, including those who had remained silent out of fear. The meeting took place in a local church hall, a neutral space where everyone could speak freely. Karen showed up uninvited, flanked by 2 Homeowner Association board members and a hired security guard. She strode into the hall with her usual air of authority, but Michael could see cracks in her facade. The murmurs and glares from the crowd made it clear she was losing support. Michael stepped up to the podium, holding a folder of evidence. "This isn't just about me," he began, his voice steady but impassioned. "It's about all of us. Karen Hudson and the Homeowner Association have been abusing their power for years, and it's time we stood up to them." He laid out the findings, showing slides of the incriminating emails and financial records Emily had uncovered. Gasps and whispers filled the room as the scope of the corruption became clear. Karen tried to interrupt, but Michael's supporters drowned her out with demands for answers. Finally, Karen lost her composure. "This is nonsense," she shouted. "These accusations are baseless, and Michael Sanders is nothing but a troublemaker trying to tear this community apart." Michael held up a hand, silencing the room. "If these accusations are baseless, then you'll have no problem explaining the $50,000 payment you received from Riverview Development last month." Karen's face went pale. The room erupted in chaos as neighbors demanded her resignation. Karen stormed out, flanked by her allies, but Michael knew the fight was far from over. The next morning, Michael woke to find his front yard littered with trash and broken glass. A hastily scrawled note was pinned to his door. "You've made a big mistake." He called the police, but as usual, their response was lackluster. Frustrated but undeterred, Michael reached out to a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases. Together, they filed a formal complaint against the Homeowner Association, citing harassment, illegal searches, and misuse of funds. Meanwhile, Emily's investigation gained traction. Her articles were picked up by larger media outlets, shining a spotlight on the corruption in the neighborhood. Karen's name became synonymous with greed and abuse of power, and public pressure mounted for her removal. But Karen wasn't finished. She held a secret meeting with her remaining supporters, plotting her next move. One of Michael's allies, a young man named Jason who worked as a delivery driver, overheard their conversation while dropping off a package. He rushed to tell Michael what he'd learned. They're planning to push through a new rule that would let them seize properties outright if fines go unpaid for more than 30 days, Jason said. They're targeting you first. Michael clenched his fists. Not on my watch. That evening, Michael and his allies convened once more. They devised a plan to counter Karen's latest scheme and protect the community from further harm. But as they worked late into the night, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that Karen still had one final desperate play left in her arsenal. Michael Sanders knew the stakes had never been higher. Karen Hudson and the Homeowner Association had played their hand, revealing just how far they were willing to go to maintain their grip on the community. But Michael wasn't about to back down, even as the pressure mounted from every direction. The night after Jason's warning about Karen's latest scheme, Michael and his allies gathered in his living room. The air was thick with tension, but also resolve. They had a plan, and this time, they were taking the fight directly to Karen. If they want to push this new rule through, Michael said, we'll make sure everyone in the community knows exactly what's at stake. And if they think they can target me first, they'll find out the hard way that I'm not going anywhere. Emily Carter, the journalist who had been instrumental in uncovering Karen's corruption, nodded. I've got a new article ready to go. It lays out their plan to seize properties and how it ties back to Riverview development. Once it's published, it'll be impossible for them to deny. Good, Monty, Michael said. But we need more than just exposure. We need action. The group decided to hold a community-wide protest outside the Homeowner Association's office. Flyers were distributed, emails were sent, and calls were made. Word spread quickly, and by the time the day of the protest arrived, dozens of residents had gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans demanding Karen's resignation. Karen, of course, was prepared. She emerged from the office flanked by security guards, her expression a mixture of irritation and disdain. This is private property, she announced through a megaphone. You are all trespassing. Disperse immediately, or I will have you removed. Michael stepped forward, his voice cutting through the crowd. This is our neighborhood, Karen, not yours, and we're not going anywhere until you answer for what you've done. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Karen remained defiant. She motioned to her guards, who began moving toward the protesters. That's when Emily sprang into action, holding up a printed copy of her latest article. This story goes live in 1 hour, she said, her voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. It details every illegal move you've made, every dollar you've taken from Riverview development, and every homeowner you've forced out. Do you really want to add suppressing a peaceful protest to the list? Karen hesitated, her composure slipping for just a moment. Then, without a word, she turned and stormed back into the building. The guards paused, uncertain, before retreating as well. The crowd cheered again, but Michael knew this was just a temporary victory. The next day, Michael received a call from his attorney, Sarah Jenkins. We've got a hearing scheduled, she said. The court is going to review your complaint against the Homeowner Association. It's our chance to expose everything. Michael felt a glimmer of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, that evening, another anonymous threat arrived. This time, it was a letter slipped under his door, reading, "Drop the case, or you'll wish you had." Michael wasn't deterred. He shared the threat with Sarah and Emily, who both agreed it only strengthened their case. As the hearing date approached, the tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. Karen's supporters grew more aggressive, confronting Michael and his allies at every turn. But the momentum had shifted. More and more residents were coming forward with their own stories of harassment and abuse, adding fuel to the fire. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Karen arrived with her usual air of superiority, flanked by a high-priced legal team. Michael, by contrast, was accompanied by Sarah, Emily, and a group of neighbors who had come to support him. The proceedings were intense. Sarah presented a compelling case, laying out the Homeowner Association's pattern of corruption and abuse with meticulous detail. She called witnesses, including Jason and several other residents who had been targeted by Karen. Each testimony painted a damning picture of an organization that had strayed far from its original purpose. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she tried to play the victim, accusing Michael of orchestrating a campaign of lies and intimidation. But her arguments fell flat, especially when Sarah revealed the financial records Emily had uncovered. "Ms. Hudson," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, "can you explain why Riverview Development paid you $50,000 under the guise of a consulting fee, just weeks before you began pressuring homeowners to sell their properties?" Karen stammered, but no coherent explanation came. The judge, clearly unimpressed, ordered an independent audit of the Homeowner Association's finances and issued an injunction against the new property seizure rule. Outside the courthouse, the mood was jubilant. Michael's neighbors congratulated him, thanking him for his courage and determination. Emily's article, published shortly after the hearing, went viral, putting even more pressure on Karen and her allies. A week later, Karen announced her resignation, citing personal reasons. The Homeowner Association board was disbanded, and plans for the redevelopment project were halted. For the first time in months, Michael felt a sense of peace. But he also knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption and greed had a way of creeping back in, and vigilance was the only way to keep them at bay. As he stood on his porch, watching his neighbors rebuild their sense of community, Michael made a promise to himself. He would always be ready to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost.